Your brand may be staying on top of current trends, but are you agile enough to stay relevant, resilient, and successful as customers, competition, and the world continues to change at a breakneck pace? I'm thrilled to share the newly revised version of my first book, The Agile Brand. I'm calling it The Agile Brand Revisited. It's been updated to reflect our continually changing world, and it provides 7 principles that form the backbone of an agile brand, offering detailed insights and actionable steps for incorporating them into your business strategy. This is the book that started it all, and I'm excited to share it with you. It's now available in print and digital formats and available everywhere. Learn more by going to the Agile Brand Guide website at www.agilebrandguide.com.
ADT knows a lot can happen in a second. 1 second, you're happily single. And the next second, you catch a glimpse of someone and you don't want to be. Maybe 1 second, you have a business idea that seems like a pipe dream. And the next, you have an LLC and a dream come true. And when it comes to your home, 1 second, you feel safe. And the next, something goes wrong. But with ADT's 24/7 professional monitoring, you still feel safe. Because when every second counts, count on ADT. Visit ADT.com today.
Welcome to Season 4 of The Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom, where we discuss business agility through customer experience, employee experience, and digital transformation. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to TEKsystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed on this show, you can go to my website at gregkihlstrom.com and read my latest articles or get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, now available on Amazon and other retailers. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce you to a new sponsor of the show, Basecamp. Throughout my career, whether it was at my own agency or now as a consultant, Basecamp is what I've always relied on to help keep projects on track, on schedule, and on budget. It takes a straightforward approach to project management. It streamlines workflow management and definitely keeps the team in the loop and on top of ongoing updates, which are all major components in a smooth-running operation. No matter if it's a simple campaign or a multi-million-dollar project, Basecamp has been a key ingredient in the recipe for a successful project and business. Go to basecamp.com/agile and sign up today to start a free 30-day trial. There's no credit card required, and you can cancel online at any time. If you want to know if Basecamp is right for your team, signing up for that free trial is the best way to do so. Remember to go to basecamp.com/agile, that's basecamp.com/AGILE to get your free trial. Thank you, Basecamp, for sponsoring this episode. Now, let's meet our guest. My name is Greg Kihlstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile Brand podcast. Today, we're going to talk about employee engagement in a remote and hybrid world of work. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Alexander Embiricos, CEO and co-founder of Remotion. Alexander, welcome to the show.
Hello, Greg. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to talking about this subject with you. Definitely something I think we're both passionate about, so looking forward to talking about it. But first, why don't we give the audience a little bit of background on yourself, kind of what led you to found Remotion?
Yeah, so I like to describe myself as a half Greek, half Malaysian who did not expect to still be living in America. And, we'll talk about Remotion and what I'm working on, but really I'm someone who cares deeply about the flexibility that you can have with remote work and believes that teams should be built from folks all around the world. My story of how I got here is I grew up in Switzerland, came to the States because I loved American airplanes and wanted to work on those. Ended up switching to software, getting a job in San Francisco, working at Dropbox. And before I knew it, I felt like I just couldn't really leave. The work was too interesting. The pay was too good. And so I found myself still in San Francisco 10 years later, finally just moved to New York a couple of years ago to experience more of the country. And ultimately, though, as I've sort of grown in this sort of professional career, I've realized, hey, a lot of the work that we do when we're on teams of knowledge workers could really benefit from working with people in all sorts of different places. And so it has been this absolutely, crazy time since the pandemic of many companies adopting remote work. And the companies that have struggled the most maybe have been teams with people who like hanging out, who like working around other people, who would never have considered remote work before the pandemic. But now that they're here are finding maybe we can be productive, but as far as relationship building, as far as engagement, that's something that's much harder remotely. Yeah. And so we started Remotion before the pandemic, trying to solve for those teams, thinking it would be, there'd be a small number of teams who like hanging out, who want to work remotely. And obviously now we're in a completely different position where the market's changed massively, and everyone is trying to figure out, as hopefully the pandemic subsides, what their strategy is going to be as far as continuing to support remote work or hybrid work, or maybe making everyone go back to the office.
Yeah, wonderful.
A little bit about Remotion in a nutshell. We're building something called a virtual office. So if you imagine you're someone who liked the office back when you had it, but now you also really like the flexibility of remote work. A virtual office might be for you, because we try to take some of those team building benefits and some of those culture building benefits of the physical office and bring them to remote teams.
Great. Yeah, no, I'm definitely looking forward to talking more about that and Remotion as well. So let's start by talking about leading a hybrid team. As you said, world of work has, some are making their way back to the office. Most have not 100% done that. And, we've got a lot of remote, pure remote work still. We've got a lot of hybrid teams and, keeping those remote employees engaged, whether it's the case that you mentioned where there are people that really thrive in that in-person environment and working alongside, or they're people that didn't necessarily thrive, but like the remote aspect, but still need to be engaged. At this point, most leaders have been working with this hybrid or even still fully remote teams for a while now, but a lot still haven't gotten it right. So, where would you start? What would your advice be to keep these remote employees engaged when, the leaders just still haven't gotten it right?
Yeah, it's a great question. And if there could just be a single takeaway in a single sentence, it would be leadership needs to be as remote as the most remote employee. So, if you're a remote company and let's say all your executives are in the office all the time and you're trying to figure out how to engage someone who never comes into the office, it's going to be really hard. Like, you can do it, but you're going to have to be doing a lot of thinking and researching and interviewing. Whereas let's say one of those executives opts to be remote as well, they're going to immediately build empathy for themselves and then for the leadership team, and you'll be able to make a lot of better decisions. So, seeing say that like Mark Zuckerberg at Meta is planning to be remote a lot of the time, that'll definitely help Meta with, being a remote company itself. So the single biggest takeaway I have is think about how remote your most remote person is and try to have leadership build some empathy for that by doing the same thing at least part-time. If we're going to break it down a little further though, there are different ways to become hybrid. There's on one extreme, there are companies where everyone comes into the office. Sorry, not everyone. Everyone on a certain sub-team comes into the office. Like, let's say all sales comes into the office every day. And then all of, say, engineering or all of marketing doesn't come into the office. That's one style where it's kind of done on a per team basis. There's also other styles where maybe you're going to leave it up to employees. So you'll have some folks coming into the office if they feel like it. Maybe those are, say, younger people or new grads. And then you might have other folks who prefer to be remote, not coming into the office. And so that might be people who you hired in a different country during the pandemic, or those might be people who, say, have kids that they need to be taken care of at the same time. And so there are these different flavors of hybrid. But what we can do is we can try to break down, I think, the two key components of engagement here. There's engagement around the work, and then there is engagement around your company culture and your relationships. The work is honestly, I think, the simplest thing to think about, which is your work style needs to support the most remote person.
Yeah.
You need to adopt a remote first way of working. And so there are a lot of best practices here. It's been written about a lot on the internet, but you can think of written culture being important, asynchronous decision-making being important, hygiene around video calls, making sure that every meeting has a video call by default. And if there are multiple people in person and then at least one person remote, then everyone needs to dial in separately so that the video latency doesn't disadvantage the remote person.
Yeah.
If you want to get really advanced around a remote first way of working, then you can start thinking about, how do you let remote folks join in on the unplanned in-person conversations? And, that's some of the stuff we think about with tools like Remotion that I'm working on. So work in summary, I would say, just you need to make sure your remote teammates are first-class citizens, and that means adopting a remote first way of working. This may sound like a really horrible deal, but the truth is that a lot of remote first ways of working are actually just fast forwarding company process. So for example, larger companies may do more in writing than smaller companies. And if you're a remote company, then you just have to do more in writing earlier. So it's not actually different than what you do. It's just earlier. Culture is a harder one because the amazing thing about the physical office is that you put people in a room together and they'll naturally just get to know each other and naturally develop some norms and maybe even become friends and develop and sort of amplify any sort of quirky things that make your company unique. And remotely, that's a lot harder to do. So I think a lot about this one call I had with a CEO of a large German company, and he was explaining to me the way that he viewed the problem, which is when you hire someone to work with your team and they can come into the office, they immediately get a feel for who you are, even on the interview day.
Yeah.
And their first day of work, they're going to get a feel for you. But if you hire someone remotely and they start their new job with you, they're going to wake up, make coffee, go sit at their desk, and it's the same desk that they had at the previous job, right? Pull the same keyboard, same screen, maybe same email client even, and work is going to feel like kind of the same to them. It's just with different people. And so his question was, what are the unique aspects of your company that you can feel in the office, and how could you give the remote people access to that? So for example, maybe the banter over lunch, which is often a top reason that people go into the office, maybe that's something that's more unique. And so how can you give remote members access to some of that lunch banter? It could be inviting them to a brown bag lunch every now and then. Maybe that's thinking about the hobbies that are discussed and making sure that there are specific places to discuss those, like Slack channels where people post pictures and are known. One of his ideas, that's one of my favorite ideas, was they had office music in their office in certain rooms. And so they thought about how to create shared music experiences between the office and remote folks. And spoiler alert, that's one of the ideas. It was my favorite that I heard from him, and we're also thinking about at Remotion.
Nice.
So, just summarizing, I guess overall, I would say, how can leaders engage remote employees on hybrid teams? First thing out of 3 is the leaders should also work remotely at least some of the time. Second thing out of 3 is be remote first in the way that you work. And lastly, when it comes to culture, think about what's unique about your company and try to expose that to remote people.
Nice. Well, yeah. So, we just talked about what leaders should do. How about the flip side of this is, are there 1 or 2 things that leaders should stop doing, or at least do a lot less of from the same perspective of optimizing engagement?
Yeah. I mean, this is interesting because before now, there actually hasn't been that much precedent for highly successful hybrid teams.
Yeah.
And so I suspect that this list is going to get a lot longer in the next year or 2. But if I had to start somewhere, I'd say that there is a right way of looking at hybrid work and the advantages of it. And then there's a different way, which maybe, I don't know if I can go so far as to say it's wrong, but I think that it will make it harder to engage remote employees. So here's the thing. If you're a team of people whose work is not based in physical, like you don't manufacture a physical good, you're knowledge workers.
Right.
I think it's important not to think of the office as a place to maximize productivity. Instead, I think you want to be thinking of the office as a way to facilitate relationship building within your team and to cater to the people who like working around other people, who like working in person. I think if you use the office as sort of a way to get more productivity out of employees, then automatically your remote teammates are going to be less engaged because they're not benefiting from those same things. And so I think you're kind of crippling yourself by leaning on the office for the wrong things.
Yeah. Let's talk about how the hybrid working model can actually benefit the employee experience a little bit more here. And, so while there can be some downsides, and, you've touched on a lot of things here already, really, but, what do you see as some of the upsides of hybrid work?
I mean, for me, remote work and hybrid work are all about talent. The workforce is changing. I mean, we've all obviously heard about the Great Resignation, and salaries coming up. And I think if you're a company and you want to hire the best talent, then you need to know that the best talent will often want flexibility in the way that they work. And if you want to hire them, then you've got to offer that at your company. So I think the best way to leverage hybrid work is to the best way to leverage remote work is basically to open yourself to hiring people from other places that don't live within 20 miles of you. The downside is that a lot of folks, especially say like new grads, if that's an important source of talent for you, they often want to meet in person or they want to be in big cities. And so what's really interesting about hybrid is you can actually theoretically get a best of both worlds where you're hiring people who like working in person, but you're also able to hire people from everywhere. I think those are probably the biggest upsides.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, maybe to add one more, something that we're seeing more of now is that there's an interesting sort of selection bias between those two sets of people I just mentioned. The people who want to come into the office are often maybe a little more extroverted than the people who want to stay at home. And so if you're a team leader thinking about how to keep your team engaged, you already know that you need to lean on the extroverts to kind of be the anchors for a lot of the team conversation that happens. And so when you start concentrating those extroverts in one place, the way this can go wrong is that, well, now they're only in this one spot, so everyone who's remote is not as engaged.
Yeah.
But I think it's actually an opportunity. You can use the office as sort of a cultural and momentum anchor for your company. So for example, we see a lot of companies who will bring new hires, even if they're remote, into the office for their first week for onboarding. Because during that moment of onboarding where you want the person to meet as many other people as possible, the office is a great place to facilitate that. And later on, when you have different events, like say like all hands or strategy sessions, et cetera, the office will be a place where the energy is very palpable just because it's all in one physical spot. And so you can think about how to leverage that such that the employee experience, even for remote people, sort of carries some of that energy as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Well, so your company, Remotion, uses the term virtual co-working. And so, I want to dive into that a little bit more. And I think it touches on some of the things we've already talked about, but, just talk about that and productivity. So first, for the audience, could you define what you mean by virtual co-working?
Yeah, absolutely. And to be completely honest with you, we're not sure that's the right name for this. We might want to call it something else, but it's basically the virtual equivalent of sitting around a table with your colleagues while you're working. So if you think of work, a typical workday has moments of deep focus where you're alone at your desk, and then you have moments of sort of intense collaboration where you're all in a meeting room and you're talking about something. And at least in a physical office, there's also these times of medium focus, medium collaboration. Like maybe if you're a manager, you might do some work in a common area as a way of making yourself available to the team. If you are an individual contributor, you might go and sit next to another person who you're working on a project with, just so that you can have some back and forth more easily while you're doing your work. Or if you're friends, and let's say you have a marketing person who's friends with a customer experience person, like maybe they might just sit next to each other because they're friends and just banter about the weekend while they're doing their work. And so all of that last type of thing are things that are difficult to do remotely. Because remotely, I think what most leaders have figured out is how to do this sort of structured, scheduled programming.
Yeah.
Right. Like we can do some stuff in writing. We can schedule on all hands. We can schedule happy hours, and in the case of happy hours, this can be really successful for the first few, and then people get kind of bored of the same thing. But all of that stuff, all of that structured programming it's high intensity. It's sometimes people complain about it being awkward. It feels like you're forced to talk at these social events, and so we think of virtual co-working as the way to virtually do that unscheduled, unstructured, more lower stakes hanging out with each other. So to define it specifically, it is a new behavior of getting onto a video call, but having your camera and microphone muted and just leaving it that way with a few colleagues. And then when one of you wants to talk, you just unmute, and then you say like, "Oh yeah, how was your weekend? Like, I heard that you went to this bar," or whatever.
Yeah.
Virtual co-working can be used for a variety of use cases. It can be used socially, like what I just described. It can be used for office hours in the case of that leader. You put yourself in the call, you let people know that you're there, and they can drop in to find you. Or it can be used for urgent projects, like say you've got 2 or 3 people who are intensely working on something that's got to be done in the next 24 hours. It's a lot more efficient for them to just have direct access to each other while they're doing that work.
Yeah, and so I think I know the answer to this, but just to kind of talk through. I mean, I think when you're in the office, to your point, there's these moments of where you just need to kind of get in the flow and knock some stuff out and everything like that. But the different types of interactions and things like that can actually enhance productivity, right? So how do you look at this idea of virtual co-working and productivity? Because certainly there's some engagement components to it where you do get to interact and stuff like that. But how do you look at it from a productivity standpoint?
Yeah. So I'd say the biggest net positive to productivity comes because co-working helps your team build relationships. At Remotion, we view relationships as really arising not out of large meetings with a lot of people, but out of the small, unstructured conversation that you might have between 2 and 3 people. When you can have a few of those conversations per day with different people, you get to know your team. And once you know your team, when you're friends with your team, you're much more productive because you can cut through all of the process and just like immediately get to the point. You're a higher trust team and therefore a more productive team. So when people talk to me about like, hey, like what would be the benefits of Remotion? Like, should we be using this? I always start by asking about their team's relationship building. And we start by looking at, if they should be using virtual coworking as a mechanism to to foster more casual conversation for relationship building. Then, and by the way, part of why that's a good idea is because that's more interesting for employees to engage with. And it can be done at really important times like onboarding. If then that catches on, virtual coworking can be used directly to help with productivity in specific moments, like when you have urgent projects. But, I think the truth is like, ideally at your company, you probably don't always want something that's on fire that needs to be done super urgently. And so there won't always be a reason for you to be getting around a table to put your heads together around a problem. Whereas in our opinion, there's always a reason to make yourself available for some casual conversation on your team throughout the work week.
Great. Well, one last question before we wrap up. You touched on this at the top of the show, and you launched Remotion before the pandemic started. So certainly with I would imagine with a slightly different mindset and set of assumptions and things like that. So just curious, having been involved in a few startups and all those kinds of things, there's the natural pivoting and such that happens. But man, you were handed kind of a left turn there, so to speak. And so, how did those huge changes change your original vision, or was it really more just now all of a sudden you had a broader audience, or, was it a little of each?
It was all of the above. It has been an absolutely, insane ride through this moment in time. I don't think anyone could ever say the pandemic was a good thing, but there were definitely some tailwinds for us in terms of market size. On the other hand, also pretty significant challenges in terms of what the product should do, given what the market needed, and in terms of competition. If it's interesting, I can walk you through a little bit of the story of what Remotion was before pandemic.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Before the pandemic started, we had this vision of building a virtual office, and we knew that our customers would be people who wanted to work remotely, but still liked hanging out and realized that they couldn't do that with the current tooling and current best practices pioneered by old remote teams. Because the old guard of remote teams were teams that, let's just say, they thrived without tooling that facilitates more hanging out. And they ended up netting out at a very sort of asynchronous way of working. We thought that we could enable more teams to benefit from remote flexibility, but it would be a very long battle. So we were sort of taking our time, really designing the product carefully. And all of a sudden, COVID hits, and we realized that although we didn't feel ready with our product, there's just a massive need for what we're building. And so not really knowing much about marketing at the time, and probably still today, we decided to launch our product about a month after it became clear the pandemic was here to stay. And we launched it on a website called Product Hunt, which is where a lot of early tech adopters go discover products. But the thing is, we didn't actually realize it was a launch. We just thought we were posting the thing. And we posted our product. We called it Remotion. And because we didn't think that people would be receptive of the idea of a product for relationship building, we decided to market it as a productivity tool. So the idea was Remotion. It's super simple. You click on someone and you're talking. It's fast video chat. And at the time, that was very unique. And so despite all the bugs, et cetera, in the product, we saw some interesting adoption there. And we saw that many teams adopted Remotion, but did not figure out how to use it. Typically, we would hear managers were really excited about it, but then individual contributors were a lot less engaged and didn't really want to be available with one click to anyone else on their team. So a lot of churn, but the teams that did adopt Remotion successfully saw incredible value out of it and found themselves being able to cancel a lot of 30 or 60-minute meetings and just talk in a faster, more flexible, more agile, if I'm going to use your word, nice. In a more agile way. Yeah. So that was Remotion 1.0. And on the basis of that, we raised some funding to continue pushing into this. We were pretty conservative and raised a lot of money because we we weren't sure what the economy would do. So we raised $13 million from Greylock and first round at that time. Then though, what happened was that the pandemic started setting in and people started getting Zoom fatigued, and the idea of fast video chat started to sound really bad to almost everyone we spoke to. Mm-hmm. And so although we had a degree of product market fit, it really felt like the rug was pulled out from under us and we just lost it. And that was certainly an interesting experience to lead through. And so, we just had a website. You could come on and sign up for our product. And we started trying to ask us, like, what is happening? First of all, like, why are people not interested? That became obvious. Right. But then also, why are people still interested? Like, who are those people? What do they want? And when we would talk to these people who were still signing up, they would come in and we would ask them, like, what are you looking for? And they're like, I don't really know, but it feels like your product would bring back the office water cooler. And we'd be like, okay, that's actually not what it is, but why do you want that? And, we'd start hearing stuff about team building, about relationship building, about specific moments like onboarding, or specific moments like, when at a large company, when the team changes and all of a sudden you're working with new people you don't know. And that's when we realized that the challenge was not productivity, it was relationship building. And what we needed to build wasn't a fast video chat product, but actually a way of having another space, just like the physical office, a space that fosters casual conversation in small groups. And so we spent most of last year really iterating at a smaller scale. We actually had a wait list. You couldn't even sign up for the product. Iterating at a smaller scale to try to figure out what was needed, how we should describe that, how we could identify those people who were looking for that, and how the product should work. And so that was a pretty big shift from productivity towards team building. Yeah. And a pretty big shift in product from sort of speed being one of the value props towards social features, like having rooms with music that plays at the same time for everyone who's remote, and letting people DJ music through Spotify, and thinking about how that might integrate with, say, an office music experience, as I mentioned earlier. And so that brings us to today, where we feel like we haven't figured out everything, but we have a really clear picture of what the market needs that we think is going to be relatively more stable. I think the question for us is, how do we spread the word, get more people to find out about us, and how do we continue helping teams during those acute moments where they need help, like, say, onboarding a new teammate or reopening an office and figuring out how to include remote teammates.
Nice. Well, like I said, there's always a bit of shifting and maneuvering that goes on when you do a startup. But yeah, that's kudos to you for finding a path through all that. And I know the journey's still going here, but excited for you in this in this journey.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like it's still very early days, but yeah, so far it's been a fun and rewarding journey for sure.
Well, Alexander, thanks so much for joining the show. For those listening, what's the best way for them to keep up with what you're doing?
To keep up with me, you can find me on Twitter at Embirico, which is spelled at EMBIRICO. And our company is Remotion. You can find us on the internet at remotion.com. So REMOTION.com. And, you can also email me at alexander@remotion.com. Would love to hear from you. And we're always looking for people to build with. So if you go to our website and you're interested, hit sign up or shoot me a note, and we'd love to get you onboarded.
Wonderful. Well, again, I'd like to thank Alexander Embiricos, CEO and co-founder of Remotion, for joining the show.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks again for listening to The Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom. Talk with you next week.
Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.theagilebrand.show. To get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, visit my website at gregkihlstrom.com. Until next week, stay agile.